Hey BookTube, I'm back here for another video. This video is going to be talking about how my April reading went. It was a very good month for reading until at the very end, as I'm sure I'll mention. But overall, it was a very good reading month. It still continued my theme of February, where I was picking out a lot more shorter books, and that's not because I wanted to bolster my reading count for some kind of arbitrary end of the year total. I don't usually keep a goal for how many books I want to read in a year because that will for sure change how I read, and I don't like that. I like the freedom of picking a 500-page book or a 1,000-page book or a 200-page book at any kind of moment. Because if I set a goal for, say, like 50 or 70 books, for me, it sets a calculation in my head about how many books I need to read a week and whatever, and it really messes me up. So I don't do that. I do have a general idea of how many books I read in a year, but that's just something I keep of interest and tally at the end of the year. I don't usually worry about that during the year. But I did read quite a bit this month compared to what I usually read, so I'll get into it now. I don't have a whole lot of prompts, at least for the first bit, because I did talk a lot about this. The first few books that I'll mention briefly here, I did talk about those in my last reading update in mid-March, where I showed you covers and I discussed them a lot more. I won't be repeating any of that now because not a lot of my ideas have changed on those books. So I'll go through them. The first book I finished in April was Cuba Fruit by Alex, was it Sornato, I think is his last name. Used to be a booktuber, his channel name is View from the Bar. He hasn't really made any videos in the last while, but he published a book on Kindle. He wanted to get it published mainstream, but it was seemed to be rejected despite him having an agent. And so he published it self-published it, and it's got a great cover. I really like the cover, and I spent most of February reading it as my lunch, my break book. So when I go to work, I have two 15-minute breaks and then a 30-minute lunch, and I was using that as the book to read while I was having my lunch. And I finished that early in March. It's a very good book. And I do recommend that you support Alex by buying that book and giving it a read. Though I will warn you that it is quite violent. It's very imaginative. It's very very full. There's a lot of jumping timelines and a lot of different characters that kind of appear on scene and come up later, and we get different characters at different stages of their lives, so you do have to keep track of that. Once you get into the flow of things, I don't think it really matters so much, but I think it's a very interesting book. It's a lot about American politics in Caribbean third world countries, but it's very imaginative because he makes up his own country and his own scenarios and follows them to their conclusions. So I think that was a very good book. I'm very glad to have read it, and I do recommend it if it's something of interest. But if you're not into books that are quite graphic, then maybe it's not for you. But and another theme that I continued was my reading of the Western Canon reading list. I read two books off that list. The first book I read as an ebook. It was Aristotle's Rhetoric. I found it mildly interesting. He has some interesting discussions on emotions, on the nature of young men versus old men, but the actual discussion of rhetoric itself I found kind of boring, like how to pander to crowds and stuff. And the different ways to do that depending on what kind of speech you're giving. Very much situated in the politics of Aristotle's day, because there's very different scenarios or situations in which you give different kinds of speeches, and I found it trifling. Really, it wasn't all that interesting. in those respects, and he saves the most basic discussion of rhetoric till like the very end of the book, which I found kind of weird. But yeah, so that was, excuse me. Yeah, that was fine to read. The other Aristotle book that I did read, which was the last book on my Aristotle list, was the Poetics. This is the last Aristotle. I think it would have been the 7th Aristotle that I read, and I read the introduction was quite long and was fairly boring, but the actual Poetics itself I found mildly interesting too. I mean, I'm being repetitive here. Mildly interesting. What I mean by that is that there were some interesting things in there, but the most of the time it's Aristotle like spinning his wheels in some kind of in the least interesting way, and the Poetics he gives his view of tragedy, which is like the main thrust of the book, but he expands that a little bit into epic, and he's a big fan of Homer, which is welcoming, which is quite welcoming when you compare it to Plato's view of Homer and of epic poetry in general in the Republic. So I guess that part is interesting, comparing the two. They're very different attitudes towards literature and art. But other than that, I didn't find it all that interesting. I do wish we had the whole thing, because apparently we do, or apparently we're missing quite a bit, or at least a good chunk of it, because Aristotle in other books and also in this book promises further discussions on different topics, including one topic that we don't actually get a whole lot, which is the topic of catharsis. It's only briefly mentioned in here what catharsis really is, and that I guess people have really latched onto that one. It's like one phrase or one tossed off line in a sentence defining tragedy. I think it's like the fulfillment of the emotions or something like that is how he translates it. But he promises a further discussion of what catharsis is, and we don't get it. We don't actually have a full discussion. It's purely all the further ideas are based off of this idea of catharsis, comes from Poetics, but it doesn't come from any kind of discussion or in-depth discussion that Aristotle has. It's all us trying to interpret what he actually means by it. The most interesting thing, I guess, would say his concept of mimesis, I think is how you say it, which is imitation. Art is imitation, which I think is certainly the more interesting idea in this book. And there's been further works like other people thinking about what that means and whatever, which I haven't read myself, but I'd be interested, I think, one day exploring that concept a bit more. But for now, I'm good with just reading the 50 pages or so that Aristotle has for the Poetics. And so that's it for Aristotle. I've done Aristotle, which means I can move on to the tragedians, the Greek tragedians, which are next on my Western canon reading list. But I don't have plans to read those in April. I'm thinking I'm going to leave those to May, and I'm going to make a video of what I want to read in April. But that won't be this video because I'm pretty sure this video will go a little bit longer. My videos tend to go long, and I don't know how, because I don't have a whole lot of interesting things to say, so I don't know, you just have to put the video on 2 times speed and maybe you'll get like 10 minutes of, I don't know, mildly interesting discussion, but whatever. And I read 2 non-fiction works besides Aristotle this month. First one was Lost Connections by Johann Hari, which was sort of a self-help book, but not quite. I mentioned a lot more in detail in my last wrap-up, so I suggest if you want to know more of my thoughts about that book and me going in depth a little bit, to revisit that video, because he takes a very different stance than you normally would think on mental illness. It's a book on anxiety and depression, and he spends the first part of the book dispelling the chemically imbalanced view, where people kind of latch onto the idea that depression and anxiety are chemical imbalances and that you need pills to get better. He himself struggles with anxiety and depression and was on antidepressants for 13 years, and he finds that and he goes through the research too, so it's not just personal experience, but he finds that that explanation is not nearly enough for as a description or as a way to help anxiety and depression. And he goes and he gives was it I think 9 causes of depression, either with society or with how we're living our life, and our connection to other people, and goes on to explore those in detail, interviewing researchers and whatnot. And then he gives not solutions so much, but possible ways of living that connect to the causes, and which you can bridge that gap in order to have I don't know, help with your depression and anxiety. So it's a journalistic work. It's more interesting than a self-help work that tries to prescribe things arbitrarily, because like, who are you, I don't know, Frank Stone, MD, who wants to tell me what to do and what not to do with depression? So having this work, which is kind of packaged like a self-help work, but is not really, I think it's a really interesting read and a thought-provoking read. It won't tell you how to live, but it'll give you like a guiding principle of, these are potential problems in your that have been found in people's lives that contribute significantly to depression and anxiety, and then it's up to you really to what to do with that information, which is refreshing. And then the other nonfiction work was on a similar theme. It's this book here, Chemically Imbalanced, by Joseph E. Smith, and then the subtitle is Everyday Suffering, Medication, and a Troubled Quest for Self-Mastery. Bit of a mouthful there, but I really, really like this book. It's a shorter book, like 250 pages, but it's thoroughly academic, and it's him. He's a sociologist, and it's based off of 80 interviews that he did of people who either take medication or against medication, but all experience depression or like symptoms of ADHD or whatever, like mental illness, like not severe mental illness like schizophrenia or psychosis or anything severe like that, where they have to be hospitalized or need medication for survival, but more of the popular conception of mental illness, where you feel depressed, you feel that you can't focus or whatever, and that it's getting in the way of what you want or what you're trying to do or what you want to be or who you see yourself to be and what you're trying to achieve. And he interviews 80 of these people, and he bases the book around those interviews, but then he also uses the interviews and the findings of the interviews to bounce off into other more research in which he confirms or at least tries to back up the generalizations from the interviewers or from the interviews into an actual like fleshed out with evidence, instead of just having it be like a I don't know, floating, purely interpretive off of a small sample size. So what he does in this book is people, he finds that these people are all experiencing what he calls everyday suffering. Their girlfriend broke up with them, and now they keep crying at random moments, and they can't seem to get over their grief, and yet they find their grief annoying, and they think that there's something wrong with them because they keep crying all the time, and they think they should have gotten over it, but they can't, and therefore they seek alleviation from that suffering through usually chemical means like pills, antidepressants, and they try to use that as a way to help them become what they think they should be. And I'm very precise in how I'm wording this because that's how he explores it in here. And it's basically a major critique of what he calls the neurobiological imaginary, which is a complicated term for kind of like the collective unconsciousness of society. And he says that our collective unconsciousness for when it comes to mental illness is neurobiological, meaning when we feel down or when we feel like we can't focus or we feel like we're always distracted or whatever, we immediately think of terms in we think of it in mechanistic terms, like there's something wrong with my brain. I need, I'm lacking serotonin, or I need some kind of pill in order to help me focus. And he doesn't so much go into whether or not those pills are effective or not. He is more concerned with the actual stories themselves of what is the suffering that people are experiencing, and how are they trying to how do they see, or what is it that they're trying to reach towards, because part of their suffering is that they can't conform to some kind of higher standard, whether it's a social standard or it's some kind of personal standard, very individualistic standard, like for example, which was common among the college students that he interviewed, where they have this standard of like, I have to be sociable, I have to be really good at studying and that kind of thing, and yet, so then they seek out, but they can't focus, or they feel that they're too shy, so then they seek out different kinds of prescription medication in order to bridge that gap, because they think that they have these mental illnesses. And he thinks that this neurological or neurobiological imaginary of thinking of our mental illness in terms of uh, biology is very harmful, and he doesn't think it's very helpful at all, because it doesn't help you identify and work through your emotions, and instead it steps around your emotions and takes your suffering outside of yourself and see it as some kind of abstract thing that is not part of you. And part of that is because you want to protect yourself. You don't want to be like, I'm crazy, or I'm there's something wrong with me, that kind of thing. People try to avoid that, and they go to the idea of pills as a way to alleviate that suffering. And he thinks that that's not, like, this is not a critique of people who do that because they're trying to alleviate their suffering in the way they know how. He's critiquing more the overall industry of mental illness, and how pharmaceutical companies have created this need for medication in order to alleviate everyday suffering, which the whole idea is absurd when you kind of put it that way. Like, I need a medication in order to help me get over the grief of losing my grandmother. It doesn't make sense. It's not inherently humanizing. Instead you think of I'm grieving over my grandmother because there's a chemical imbalance, and so you're almost sidestepping the problem in order to try to reach at whatever the ideal is that you want to be. Like, a lot of people, part of their suffering was that they can't reach what they want to be. So maybe you grieve for your grandmother, you think that, if I were a better person, or if I were a different person, or if I was the person I'd want to be, I would be able to handle the death of my grandmother a lot better. And so then you try to bridge that gap through whatever means, like through a prescription medication. And he is more of an advocate of therapy, because he says that therapy has become trivialized, where people don't take it very seriously at all anymore, and even therapists themselves have bought into the neurobiological imaginary, where they think in terms of biology too, and instead of trying to help people through their issues, they are more willing to have their clients get a prescription medication from a psychiatrist or some kind of doctor, and work through their issues that way, instead of actually confronting what their issues are trying to tell them. That's a convoluted way of trying to summarize this book. I want to do a full video on this book, but I'm going to have to really dive into this book and see what his arguments are and why this book really connected with me, because I found it absolutely fascinating. It was very, very good. It was a slow read, even though it was only 250 pages. It's very academically written, but it was thoroughly enlightening on almost every page. So I was very pleased with that book. And then I want to mention one more fiction book, and then another like earthquake or a huge catastrophic change in my reading that basically dominated the second half of March for me. The first book is the last book that I talked about in my previous video. So I read The Tarzan of the Apes, and I read that very on whim, because I watched the Disney movie of Tarzan, and I really enjoyed it. It's very enjoyable animated movie, and I was very curious immediately to read the actual source material, because Tarzan is a character that I'm sure most people have heard of, and so I wanted to read the source material. So I did read the first book in the enormous Tarzan series, and I really enjoyed it. It was so thrilling. Just the whole idea of this man, of this baby, being taken in by this group of apes and being raised in the jungle and having to learn and survive in the jungle while also still being thoroughly human. I thought it was just fascinating, and it's a naturalistic way of creating a superhero, and I really, really, really enjoyed that dynamic of the thing, where it's not like some kind of alien or some kind of scientific experiment gone wrong, or any kind of scientific mumbo jumbo or whatever that creates a superhero. It's just purely being raised in a species similar to him, in the apes, and then adapting in their environment, and then coming to the human environment and having to encounter and learn that environment, and then having the best of both worlds. And I just thought it was so good, and the ending is bittersweet. It does leave you, or left me a bit wanting to read the second book. I'm not sure if I want to, though, because the series gets kind of crazy, where he's meeting up with all these different kinds of supernatural and whatever, like cities and whatever, and creatures, and I don't know, it just seems it kind of goes off from what initially drew me to the story. So I'm just gonna read the first one and say I really enjoyed it, and then kind of leave it at that, even though the ending does, and I'm not going to spoil the ending. I almost did, but I'm not going to spoil the ending, because the ending it's a really good moment, even if it's bittersweet. But yeah, that's Tarzan of the Apes. And then the last book, or at least the last kind of cataclysmic event in my reading that kind of dominated the rest of the month for me, was reading the Earthsea series by Ursula K. Le Guin. The series is 6 books, and this is an omnibus volume of all 6 books. I read the first 4, and they're fairly short, so they're easy to get through. And I started off with The Wizard of Earthsea, which is the most famous book of the series, of course, because it's the story of a wizard as a boy. As a boy, he grows up and he grows into being this great wizard. But it's also like a search for himself, and having to come to terms with his own power. The wizard name is Ged, and it was a terrific book, the Wizard of Earthsea, the very first book. It's an amazing book. It is billed as YA, and I can see that, but I think even as an adult you can enjoy these books. So I read the Wizard of Earthsea, and then immediately just jumped into the next book, which is the Tombs of Atuan, which plays off of a hint that Ursula K. Le Guin gives in her first book, where that's one of the adventures that he would go on to have as a more mature wizard, and we get that adventure in the first book, in the second book, which is even shorter than the first book, and we change perspectives. We go to following Tenar, who goes by a different name, but she's the priestess of the Nameless Ones on this far eastern island, and she has been named priestess ever since she was 5 years old. So all she knows growing up is this life of being a priestess, and she lives amongst mostly women who are also in dedication to different gods and different shrines. But she's like the highest of the high priestess, and so it's her having a sense of power, but also being powerless because she has almost no interaction with other people, has no understanding of the world other than her little circle around the temples where she lives, and it's a wrestling with herself as a woman with supposedly having power but having no power, and wrestling with the darkness, like the supernatural darkness of this world that she lives in, and the powers that she is supposed to serve. And then of course Ged comes into the picture, Ged the wizard, as a more mature wizard, and their interactions and whatnot are really the pinnacle of the book. They're the highlight of the book. I found the beginning where it goes through all the rituals of her life, her early life and whatnot, to be kind of boring. They do drag on a bit. They're interesting in a way, but once Ged enters the picture, then the whole book kind of takes off and blossoms from there, and it was very good after that. So I really did like the second book as well. And then I read the other two books. I read 2 books after that, which are, let's see, The Farthest Shore and Tehanu. I think those are the next 2 books. The Farthest Shore follows Ged as a much older man when he is basically the head wizard of like the entire world of Earthsea, and he goes on an adventure with this young man in order to find the root of the evil in this world, as things are changing for the worse. There seems to be some kind of power that's loosening from the world, and wizards are losing their power, and Ged has to go and find out what the cause of this is and how he can stop it. And he takes the young man along because the man is a descendant of an ancient king, and there's a prophecy that the ancient king's ancestor, the one who claimed the throne, the future throne to all of Earthsea, will come from his line, and that's an ancient legend. But this young man is part of this ancient lineage, and of course it's fairly obvious from the beginning that he's supposed to fulfill the prophecy as future king. And I'm not spoiling the book really to say that, but they go on adventures, and it's basically a coming of age book for this young man whose name is Aspen in the book, and then also a very different view of Ged than we get in the first 2 books, because in the first 2 books Ged is more like this figure who is learning to become wise. And then in this other book, it's more Ged, the normal person who is only tangentially a wizard. And I find that was a very interesting contrast, and I guess a welcome one in the sense when you think of wizards in fantasy, you don't usually think of the type of wizard that Ged is in the books of Earthsea. And then we come to the 4th book, the last book that I read. I'm not going to be reading anymore for now. So I have the collection of short stories, which is the Tales of Earthsea, and then the final book, which is The Other Wind. I'm saving those for a different time. I'm kind of bummed out, or at least tired of this world already. I just recently finished reading the 4th book, Tehanu is what it's called, And Tahanu was certainly my least favorite of the four books so far. It's a very different feel to the from the other books, in the sense that well, for one, uh, she wrote it a lot later than the other three books. The first three books were written in the late '60s, early '70s, and then Tahanu, the fourth book, uh, comes into play in 1990, and it's basically following Tenar as she is as a middle-aged woman on the island of Gaunt, and it's about her domestic squabbles of um, having become a widow and her two grown-up children that have both moved out, and uh, now she has to basically raise this other child that she has come across who's been severely scarred and injured because her degenerate parents somehow tried to burn her to death, but they couldn't bring themselves to do it completely, and so they left her permanently scarred, like part of her, half her face, and then her hand is basically withered, and only a few fingers work on that hand. And and then she's like a, I don't know, 7 or 8 year old girl in this story, and it's basically Tenor trying to come to terms with herself as a woman, formerly a priestess with an arbitrary amount of power, but then becoming a normal wife to a farmer and a mother, and then now here she is as a middle-aged woman who has to work the farm herself with help, of course, but in a very different position. And then there's a gimmick on Ged from the third book that Ursula K. Le Guin plays out to its full, and I hated that gimmick. It's to say the gimmick would be to spoil the third book, I think. So I'm not going to mention it here, but I gotta say, that fourth book was, I mean, it totally undid a lot of the things that we had liked about Ged to begin with, at least in my mind. The Ged that we get in the first two books was really a really strong, wise but like down to earth kind of person. But then in the third book we get a more like a cranky old man Ged, and then in the fourth book we get a very weak and pathetic Ged, and I don't like that. I didn't like that subversion there. And the fourth book is very much like a feminist tale, almost, and that's not the reason why I disliked it, because feminist perspectives in feminist tales can really be done well. I just didn't think this one was one of them, because it takes characters that we already know, that we already enjoy, and subverts them in very unrealistic ways, because the Earthsea world is very much a patriarchal one, where women are expected to raise children and, make food and clean up the house and help out on the farm, while men are like these masculine figures who, are in charge of the household and whatnot. And it's basically Ursula K. Le Guin trying to undo her own world. And I think there's a place for that, but I think the way she went about doing that was very wrong-headed. She should not have been taking these characters that we already know and love and changing them drastically. If she had done exactly what she had done, but then to two different, very different characters on, say, on different island, I think it would have worked way better. And though saying that, the subplot with the scarred child, because she becomes like the linchpin for later books, from my understanding, I think that was the best part of the book. The young girl, she's extremely self-conscious, of course, about her burns, but she's also very perceptive and intelligent, and I thought that was very touching and well done, and I just wish that it had been done differently, so that it didn't subvert a lot of what she had already built up into this point in this world. I don't know if that makes any sense. Maybe if you haven't read these books, maybe none of what I'm saying here makes sense, but that's just my sense, that from The Wizard of Earthsea all the way up to Tehanu, which is the fourth book in the series, I think they progressively get worse, and that's just my opinion. My opinion. Maybe you'd think differently, but I hope the next two books are more entertaining, or I mean, not more entertaining, because all books were entertaining. All four books were entertaining in their own way. I just didn't like how she dealt with the characters. Because Ursula K. Le Guin, she's a great writer. I was thoroughly hooked all the way through, which is why I read all four books, basically one after another. I don't usually do that, especially, or even in a book in a series. As you saw with Tarzan of the Apes, even though I thoroughly enjoyed the first book, I didn't immediately go on and read the second book. But with the Earthsea series, I certainly did. But yeah, that's what I've read in March. I'm just going to mention briefly what I've started already reading, and then I'll call this video, close off this video. I don't know. I can't speak. I really can't. But that's why I'm making videos, isn't it? So I can improve on my speaking here. So the book I'm currently reading right now is A Day and a Night and a Day by Glenn Duncan, and it's a fairly short book, but it's extremely compact. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I'm just over halfway through. I really, really like this book, though it's a bit of the whole premise and plot is kind of wacky. It's the story of a man who's being tortured in his 60s, so late in life. He's being tortured in a torture I don't know, in a torture chamber or whatever, but it's not like one of those medieval ones. It's one of those modern ones where the interviewer has a Gap t-shirt, and he's muscular and good looking, and he's very flamboyant with his narcissism. And the whole premise of the book is that it's as he's being tortured, he's constantly having these memories. Memories about his life and the trajectory. I can't say that word. The point of his life, or the what his life has been, and and up to that point, and what has led him to that moment where he's being tortured as a criminal, and having to give information away, and it's not what you think it is, because that sounds very dark and bleak, and it is. This is a fairly dark novel, because the main character is fairly nihilistic, and so is the interrogator. But there's an undercurrent of religion and relationship and sex throughout the whole thing. It's quite stark, and especially because the main memory. The main focal point of this character's life, whose name is Augustus Rose, he grew up in the 60s and had a relationship with a white woman. And as you know, if you don't know, he's a black man having a relationship with a white woman in the 60s, which I can tell, as you would think, was not received well by her family or anything, or by the people around them. And that would give it the air of like a social justice kind of, idea, but it's so much more than that. Because Augustus and his girlfriend, Selina, they're thoroughly broken people, and they have to wrestle with their brokenness together. And 60 years later, his relationship with Selina is still the highlight of his life, and like the focal point of his life. Everything that he does, that he thinks of, that he references, always seems to go back to a moment with Selina, and it's very, very well done. But it's also graphic in some points, and very disturbing too. But then the final cherry on top is that this is written like this. This is brilliantly written. I don't know if I should read a section to you, but there was. Just to get a glimpse at what this book is about. Let's see here. Yeah, here we go. I'll read you a section from this book. He held her hips tighter and pulled her close against him. It was a thrilling new open space to step into, the certainty that he wanted to have a child with her. Now that he knew it, he realized he'd been waiting for the knowledge for some time. Inglorious biology was the poetic contrast to the rarefied stuff of spirit, tubes and eggs and wriggling sperm, the monstrous umbilicus, and the gory porn of delivery, all to heave a new consciousness upon the world. And then it quotes Latin here. I guess I should just butcher it. Inter facies et uranum nascumu. It's said on the wall in the John at Harry's. Harry's is a bar that they frequent. Selina reluctantly translated, "Between shit and piss we are born." This was God's aesthetic, Augustus saw. Plated polarities, divinity in a cowshed, new souls amid sewage. And it just goes on from there. It's dirty, but it's so striking, and it's his prose is searing in the way that it penetrates insight with vulgarity, and I find that just fascinating. So I don't know where this book is going, but all I can say is that I'm certainly enjoying it right now. So that is my reading for April, or for March, sorry. April, I have a whole list of books I want to read. I have a whole idea of books that I want to read, and I will get into that in a different video, so stay tuned for that. Thanks, BookTube.